on some of those.
Am I guilty?
Well, I am not a judge, but
Precisely. Because we are insisting on a point.
Has said that you will appear
my
again next
sister.
year.
Wait, you want to hear me? I don't want to hear you all the time. I'm saying to you, I was removed before I finished my term, and nothing.
For some time now, I've been searching for Jacob Zuma's speeches in English, especially since his comeback into South Africa's politics. His new strategy has been the fact that most of his speeches have been in Zulu language, and we know many of us do not speak or understand Zulu. But here in this interview in English, he speaks about why he shouldn't be seen as a corrupt president and actually explains with some valid points on the fact that he is not corrupt and shouldn't be seen as one that was corrupt. Let's listen to his speech on what he thinks about his regime, and we'll be back for some really interesting analysis.
The judges quoted the constitution of this country. Are you saying that they misinterpreted the constitution?
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
So what next for you, now that the courts have said you cannot run as MP?
No, I'm a freedom fighter. I'm going to fight it because it's unfair, as well as it is not a democracy. Democracy brings freedom. This is not freedom.
Your own former party, should I say, prematurely ended your presidency on corruption allegations. You have not addressed that.
No, it was not on corruption allegations. Please, we are making a big mistake. There was no corruption that was ever found on me. Singing about Zuma's corruption was a lot, but who has produced anything? Do you have any evidence?
Some call it state capture.
Huh?
Some called it state capture.
No.
And some of the people who are alleged to have worked with you left this country.
I don't know what is a state capture means. Even that one, I can tell you a lot. It was all funny. I'm asking if you heard people saying, I am corrupt, what did I do? Do you have any little fact about it?
There's still cases, and next year you'll be appearing before court again.
No. Am I guilty?
Well, I am not a judge, but
precisely, because we are insisting on a point.
Has said that you will appear again next year.
Wait, you want to hear me? I don't want to hear you all the time. I'm saying to you, I was removed before I finished my term, and nothing was ever produced as evidence.
As we go to another election, can South Africans trust you, and what are you going to do differently?
South Africa trusts me. Don't ask whether they can. They are trusting me. They trusted me when I was the president, and you can ask any South African how the country was at the time. They are trusting me now. They are taking me back because they say that's where this is the man we trust.
Yeah, so what do you guys think? I think it's really interesting. And for this video, I want to conduct an analysis, right? An academic analysis. I borrow from a research done on The Conversation. The Conversation is an academic website. It's a website that does academic analysis and that promises a lot of academic rigor. And I really enjoyed their arguments. And so in this article here on The Conversation, it touches on how we can understand Jacob Zuma's rule in light of the historical trajectory that the ANC government has experienced since 1994 when South Africa became a post-apartheid state. Okay, really interesting. And watch till the end. So it actually argues that the way we should understand Jacob Zuma's 9-year period in presidency actually demands a historical and theoretical context. So in understanding this, we have to understand the relationship, right, between the state, the government, and the ruling party in South Africa as three dimensions of politics. And that the state is the overall machinery of power that actually comprises of different institutions and practices. And it tends to persist over time when parties, politicians, and cabinets change or evolve. Now, government is actually a formal structure of ministries and policies which may change over time, right? and the ruling party is now the actor. So the ruling party, in this case, the ANC, if the EFF becomes a ruling party, it would actually be encapsulated in this definition, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, and all this. So the ruling party is an actor that plays a role in running the government depending on the circumstances. So we see three of these really interesting definitions that make up South African politics, or politics generally. So it's the state, the government, and then the ruling party. And how do we understand Jacob Zuma's regime in this light? So what then this article defines as a regime is the balance between the three dimensions. Okay, so the state, the government, and the ruling party form what is called the regime. And this regime refers not only to the structures, the politics, and the practices, but also to a less tangible ethos that gives a sense of coherence to the entire set of institutional relationships. Now, if we understand the post-apartheid era in South Africa, the post-apartheid era since 1994 has actually seen three terms of rule dominated by the same party. So, what a lot of you in the comments and also in research actually speaks about a democratic dictatorship. So, in other words, South Africa's governance, in a way, since 1994 has been this really convoluted contradiction, in the sense that we could term it a democratic dictatorship where the ANC has been in power since 1994. And for most of the post apartheid period, that were led by three different personalities, Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, and Jacob Zuma. Each was governed by a different ethos: reconciliation and nation building under Mandela, building and a technically capable state under Mbeki, and then Zuma's ethos now is what we would need to discuss, because it actually encompasses more of what I think and I interpret as being a man of the people. So it was an era, that enthroned populism in that regard. So Jacob Zuma came to the forefront of the political consciousness of South Africans as a man of the people, right? So let's continue. So it speaks about how the primary challenge for Mandela's government was actually to merge the different political institutions and traditions into a coherent whole while maintaining a social and political stability. This was exactly after the apartheid regime in 1994 onwards. Now, the ethos of reconciliation dominated during Mandela's reign, and this required a reformist approach, right? Keeping the old style of management while gradually changing personnel and policies. So this is why a lot of people argue today that apartheid only changed faces, right? So there was it was kind of like a reformist approach, while the old style of management was kept, but then there was a gradual changing of personnel and policies, which not all of them was successful. But an orderly but gradual shift of power was needed to ensure that the volatile environment at the time post 1994, did not get in the way of the new political order that was being built by Nelson Mandela. Right? So, according to this research, Nelson Mandela's approach ensured a peaceful transition, really challenging one, but it was also problematic because many senior apartheid and Bantustan bureaucrats kept their positions. Even while they were replaced, their ethos and mode of operation prevailed. So this is the same argument. A lot of people still think that apartheid still remains dominant in South Africa. EFF Vice President Floyd Shivambu actually has argued once that apartheid became worse under a black-dominated ANC government. A lot of other entrepreneurs, white entrepreneurs in South Africa, also argued that apartheid structures still remain, despite the fact that South Africa has gone past the apartheid era. So this is the way to understand the weaknesses of Nelson Mandela's regime at the time. Now let's take it forward to Mbeki's regime. So with the transition to Mbeki's period, changes in state government and party became evident. The primary challenge shifted from ensuring stability to enhancing modernity, from racial reconciliation to technical proficiency, from creating a unified state to making it efficient. So Thabo Mbeki, and I see a lot of your critique in the comments. You speak a lot about how Mbeki is excellent in giving speeches, but there's been a lot of weakness during his regime. So it's like his focus then was to make the state efficient. He was more on the making efficient, the more of making things efficient. He was on that efficiency side of things. Okay, so this was Thabo Mbeki. So under Thabo Mbeki, the new imperatives were centralizing planning and designing and implementing policies. The idea of an African renaissance served as a unifying ethos, and this period actually changed the framework of the African Union at the time. But then Mbeki's regime had an ambitious effect. On the one hand, it presented a vision of unity and development, and on the other, it led to racially inspired delusions, as was the case with the Mbeki AIDS denialism and his support for Robert Mugabe's regime in Zimbabwe. So these were, according to this article, two weaknesses or two strands of Mbeki's regime which might not have been favorable to a lot of the observers at the time. Now, the article also states that the biggest problem of the Mbeki period from the margins of politics was its attempts at centralizing excluded voices from the margins of politics and non-state actors. So in turn, this undermined the quest for policy effectiveness, a failure that was to serve as a background for Jacob Zuma's regime. You see, so let's take that again. For me, I think it's really interesting to understand this. It says that Mbeki's period, right? Thabo Mbeki's regime had the biggest problem of its attempt at centralizing excluded voices from the margins of politics and non-state actors. So, in other words, Mbeki sort of like ignited this centralization of excluded voices from the margins of politics and also pulling in non-state actors within the center, in other words, and this would be a place, it would kind of like a preparation for the effervescence of populism in that regard, where Sabombeki now had to pick up the mantle from that, what had actually been established by Mbeki, and capitalize on the centralized, excluded voices and non-state actors in South Africa and build on that as a basis for his regime. So that's really important to understand Jacob Zuma's entrance and the character of Jacob Zuma's regime in South Africa. So now let's go now to understanding Jacob Zuma proper, especially now in this video where he speaks about the fact that he was not corrupt, but he was actually taking a mantle that seemed to have been actually established by his predecessor. Okay. Now, Jacob Zuma was termed a man of the people. Zuma's appeal was due precisely to his being so unlike his illustrious predecessors. Neither a giant of the struggle like Mandela, nor an nor an intellectual like Thabo Mbeki. Instead, he was seen as a man of people, not known for grand policy visions, the verbose grammar, and and expectations of pragmaticism, but seeking practical solutions instead of ideological purity. So this was Zuma, according to this article. He wasn't known for these large policy visions and really large speeches and all of that, but he was really one that really sought for practical solutions. What at the level of African Union, a lot of people argue African solutions for African problems. That kind of approach. So this was Jacob Zuma. He really sought to find pragmatic solutions to the problems South Africa faced at that time. And he wasn't really a man who alluded to a sort of like an ideologically pure stance. He wasn't much of that kind of person. Okay. So Zuma's lack of commitment to specific policies meant that he was supported by opposing factions that thought him malleable. In short, a man for almost all people. Even his ethical transgressions weren't seen as obstacles. They made him more human instead. And human, all too human, he proved to be, dispensing with the need to offer grand visions of the state, or claim competence in government, or manage the party with impartiality. Zuma used power to advance a single goal. And what this article explains as that goal is self-enrichment. Okay, so we know in one of the videos I spoke about, Rob Hersov actually said that Jacob Zuma is broke. He allowed everyone else steal, but he didn't steal. So it kind of like speaks more to this objective of Jacob Zuma, according to this article, that Jacob Zuma was really like a man of all the people. He was almost easily malleable since he had no strong allegiance to any ideological bloc at the moment or any strong ideological frameworks. He was really malleable by multiple kinds of perspective and views and worldviews and epistemes to drive South Africa into any kind of direction. And so, as a result of being a man of the people, he became, like, according to this article, a man of almost all the people. And this leads to a really convoluted perspective and positionality for a regime. So let's go on. It says Jacob Zuma's strategy adopted to mix and match individuals and structures to serve this goal of self-enrichment. Okay, his approach had three components which he pursued systematically. One, they were the strategies were to control parts of the state that would help shield him from accountability, in particular, especially the criminal justice system. Two, his strategy actually had to control aspects of government that facilitated access to resources, minerals, and energy, state-owned enterprises, and ultimately the treasury. So we see that former President Thabo Mbeki speaks about SAP. You know, how Jacob Zuma had these lots of deals with the treasury, the South African treasury at the time, and is actually SARS. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for, SARS. So South African Revenue Service, I think. So Thabo Mbeki, indicts Jacob Zuma a lot in the mess that went on in SARS, and probably this article explains that part of his reasons was to control the aspects of government that actually facilitated access to resources, especially at the level of treasury, the revenue system. And thirdly, Jacob Zuma's strategy was to control party institutions to neutralize opponents, particularly those who could undermine him. So this is how far this article goes in describing Thabo Mbeki. So the rest he discarded. Areas of government not directly relevant to looting resources receive no attention. Left to their own devices, spheres such as education, health, welfare, public safety, housing, agriculture, water were handled with no interference from the top. So Zuma's concentration were in these three domains. One was at the part, the part of the state that should shield him from accountability, especially the justice system. Two was control the aspects of government that facilitated access to resources, especially in minerals, energy, state-owned enterprises, and the treasury. And then three, to control the party institutions that could neutralize his opponents, especially those ones that could undermine his reign as president of South Africa. So this was Zuma's strategy, according to this article. Now, it also speaks about corruption on a large scale. So, since in this video, Zuma speaks about the fact that he was not corrupt, he shouldn't be seen as a corrupt. This article goes in describing the character of corruption that dominated Jacob Zuma's reign in government. So, it says corruption on a larger scale preceded Zuma and was likely to continue after him. So, the difference is that Jacob Zuma's entrance into that fume of corruption that was actually already existing in the South African political space was that Zuma opened the gates for political entrepreneurs to enrich themselves by creating opportunities to loot. So this kind of like speaks to what Rob Hersov says, that Jacob Zuma allowed everyone else to steal, but he didn't steal, and that he's broke. So this article, in a way, kind of like corroborates what Rob Hersov actually spoke about. Now, the article says that the impunity that guided Zuma's actions permeated all state institutions, but there was resistance, especially within the state of the court system, remained largely intact and in many cases fought back, as did the public protector. Large sections of the media, NGOs, the political opposition, and principled individuals all played a role in the fight against Jacob Zuma and this perceived looting at the time. So enclaves within the government, especially the treasury in particular, continued to perform their role as long as they could. So eventually the tide turned, heralding a new transition of power in the ANC. That's now the regime of President Cyril Ramaphosa, which a lot of you and a lot of media outlets have described as the worst South Africa has ever seen. So what lessons could we draw from this understanding of Zuma's period in presidency? It says that one key takeaway is that a free media and civil society voice independent courts, and accountability mechanisms and honest politicians are all necessary, especially now that South Africa is building up towards the next elections tomorrow, actually 29th, because this video is done on the 28th of May. Tomorrow, South Africa will be voting. Then there's a need for accountability mechanisms, independent courts, free voices of the media and civil society, and honest politicians. Really important. And so that's why the idea of a coalition, if the ANC is unable to get a 50% plus one vote majority in these elections, it would be really important to see how the political space in South Africa would fare if there will be multiple, of these parties coming together in coalition. A lot of people have argued that coalitions haven't worked at the level of the regions because it's almost has been seen as a disaster. If that disaster would now be taken into the level of presidential leadership in South Africa, no one knows. But whatever the case is, anyway, I think that coalitions would allow the input of these multiple voices that would be able to check and balance the multiple idiosyncrasies which the dominant party or leadership at the level of the presidency could want to impact, as we have seen, as this article has broken down Jacob Zuma's period in government. But this has been a lot of information. Jacob Zuma actually argues and insists that he was not corrupt, and this article in a way corroborates that, but actually says that Jacob Zuma actually built on the corruption that was already existent, but now he actually opened the gates for political entrepreneurs to now become more active in looting South Africa's wealth and South Africa's resources. So this is how probably one direction through which we could understand Jacob Zuma's presidency previously and what his entrance now through the MK party might mean for South Africa's politics. But I don't know, what do you guys think about this? It's been a really interesting one. Share your thoughts in the comments.